Bob, would you introduce our speaker for tonight's presentation?
Yes, tonight we're fortunate to have a great speaker, Gregg Marco. He's W6IZT. Many of you know Gregg. I'm sure you recognize his call because he's a very accomplished DXer and contester, and I think he's probably been on more than 30 DXpeditions. He is just back actually from last week. He was down in St. Martin with Hal, W8HC, and they were operating from St. Martin, and they operated from both sides of the island. And they had one of their rig in the boxes on the Dutch side, and operating as PJ7. So they operated as both FS and PJ7 down there. So I thought that was a pretty neat trick. Anyway, Gregg was involved in the deployment of some of the very first rig in the box trials with George Walnar, AA7JV. And after he had gained some experience in that, he got the idea that the rig in the box might be able to be miniaturized somewhat to the extent that it could be carried onto an airplane, which is a far cry from the rig in the box in its original design. So as you can imagine, this opens up all kinds of great opportunities. And this device was used down in CE0 and recently in PJ7. So Gregg's going to tell us about the development of this, and hopefully a little bit about his adventure down there in St. Martin. And I think he can tell us a little also, I hope, Gregg, about youth on the air and the expedition we just funded. So whenever you're ready, Gregg, please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me this evening. A lot of familiar names. I remember K9AY from when he was down, or K9YC when he was, he's out in California, aren't you, Jim?
Yep.
Follow your audio stuff and your RF choke stuff with a lot of interest and admiration for the good work that you're doing.
I have equal admiration for what you and George are doing.
Thank you very much. So when we teed this up with Bob, it was kind of like, okay, let's talk about what we're doing with this, what we're calling next gen rib, and we're going to talk about CB0, and then we went to St. Martin and did a little island hopping on both sides there. The 3D2 thing kind of came together, and in the last couple of months, it's been really exciting because a lot of pieces have come together where we think that we have a sustainable way to bring in youth into DXpeditioning. And so that's kind of the back end of the presentation. So I won't get too far ahead of myself. But again, I want to thank you for having me. I'm located just outside of Blue Ridge, Georgia. I'm a former Bay Area guy, but I left a long time ago, and I'm now a Southerner, and I like it down here, and good stuff all the way around. So kind of where all this started is rewinding back to 2018 when George was a part of a group that went to Baker Island. Fish and Wildlife, as we all know, has not made it easy for hams to activate the entities that they manage. And we've been looking at ways. George is spearheading this with the support and assistance of the Northern California DX Foundation to come up with a way to remove some of these barriers. So the thought was, if we can make the radios smaller, if we can make access to the island, limited, if you will. If we can keep the operators off, we might have a better chance of getting some of these entities approved. You think about it, this timeline here, I'm setting the stage in 2018. George has been out in the Pacific now for a year and probably 4 months. I was last with him when he went to Ducey. I happen to have some relationships with the folks on Pitcairn that manage Ducey. Was able to get access to the island, get a license fairly easily, and we actually got that DXpedition from what started out as a call on WhatsApp to being on the island in about 30 days, which is kind of unheard of. So I digressed a bit. So George's ribs are self-contained kilowatt HF and 6-meter radios. And the packaging enables a very rapid deployment model. And I started working with George about 4 years ago on this. And the first trip I made with George to the Bahamas, we had the ribs set up in an hour and a half, 4 of them, ready to go. Power's running, everything's going. And then we spent the rest of the day putting up antennas, and we're putting up antennas the next day. So we thought, well, this really doesn't work too well. So we adopted an antenna model where most expeditions have an antenna per band, where our approach is more an antenna per rib. We use non-resident antennas. We use a automatic remote tuner at the base of the antenna, and it allows us to extend the capabilities from a rapid deployment perspective of the rib to the entire DXpedition. We've landed on using a design from Tom Schiller called the V8. It's a 19-foot vertical with a pair of counterpoises, and it plays really well when you park it up next to salt water, as does a light bulb or a wet noodle or whatever. But they work real well. They go up in a matter of minutes, and it's enabled us to get on the air much more quickly. So the radios are on the island. Got a 900 megahertz link from the island to the boat. PCs are on the boat. Local operators are on the boat. Quasi-local, if you will. We'll call them local. And the remote operators connect over Starlink. So I made a number of trips over several years with George to the Bahamas. Real fun gig if you can get it, I'll tell you. I probably have spent 3 man months on Magnet. Really enjoyed it. I've been all over the place with George. Very fascinating guy to work with. He challenges me on, every corner of the box, and I struggle to challenge him on any. So we started looking at ways to access this, and we characterized, well, maybe we're in an area where we can get some 4G coverage or 5G coverage. None of that technology worked very well. The biggest hurdle to using mobile technologies for this kind of backhaul is the latency varies significantly. If you watched a video buffer on your cell phone, it buffers for 8 or 10 seconds because you might have 3 or 4 or 5 seconds of latency when you're not getting any data. So that's kind of the characterization of cellular as it relates to trying to use it for backhaul for a project like this. Starlink, on the other hand, works great. It's absolutely amazing. You think about the rib, and before Starlink, it was just the rib and Magnet and some local operators on the boat. Starlink opened up the whole world to being able to access these expeditions. So with the introduction of Starlink, I would lay awake on Magnet and think about what we could do, and came up with a bunch of what ifs. So what if we could repackage this thing? Could we make it smaller and lighter so that one person can carry it? Can we lower the cost? These things are not inexpensive. Can it be hoisted over your head and put on an overhead carry-on baggage? in thinking of the other use cases, could we build in some measure of fault tolerance? And we've done a really good job of that. We've got all the hooks in place to make it somewhat self-healing. It's just a matter of tying it together with software. So the Raspberry Pi acts as a supervisor, and the router and the PC and everything is monitored, including the K3, and they're all restarted if there's some sort of anomaly detected. Could we make it available to DXpeditioners around the world? And the challenge in that little piece of it is that we had to make it real simple. I don't have any operating manuals. For operating the rib, there's a sticky note, which is a little Windows thing on the desktop of the PC that gives you 10 lines of instructions. You connect in with any desk, you connect with your audio, and you read the instructions and away you go. It's really that easy. So we looked at some use cases, and augmenting a traditional DXpedition is one of them. And I'll talk more about that as I get into the Juan Fernandez piece of the talk. Could we actually deploy these in an unmanned location? Thinking of places like that we can't go to, like Midway. Boy, wouldn't it be nice to put one of these on Johnson, because you're not going to get anybody to set foot on Johnson. It's managed by multiple departments in the U.S. government, and in our lifetime, I'm sorry to say, I don't think we'll see Johnson come back on the air. And this bullet point here is, could it be leveraged to expand the reach of DXpeditioning? And that's kind of vague, subject to interpretation, but that is a segue to what I want to talk about with what we're trying to do with the young hands. So the answer is yes. Here we've got George on the left, AA7JV with his associate Mike KN4EEI with one of their ribs. Here we've got Hal. I met Hal in Boone, North Carolina. Or no, this was up in Tennessee somewhere. Gave him the rib to take to Juan Fernandez. And you can see he's not struggling to carry it. And it's definitely been squeezed into that. That's a 3-rack unit sort of mixer box that the bands would use if they were in concerts or something. It was the right size, or so I thought when I started. Learned a lot about getting rid of heat, because the first time we fired this up, it was like, well, okay, we're going to stop right now because I got to take it apart and start over. So, but we solved the heat problems, and I've become sort of a fanatic about heat. You can learn a lot just by monitoring the temperature of something. A lot more than you could learn from monitoring any other one single parameter. So let's just kind of talk about, and I've got some windows on here, I hope you don't see them. So just kind of doing a comparison, but I want to point out that this is really not an apples to apples comparison. George did all the heavy lifting. Think about inventing the first cell phone. Took a lot of work. Bell Labs, tons of engineers to create this, what is now ubiquitous device that we can't live without. Certainly our kids can't, because every kid I see has got either a tablet or a phone in front of their face, which I think is real sad. So they both cover 160 through 6 meters. George's direction was with the Flex, and the current versions of the Flex are much too big for what I'm doing. There's a lot of very expensive air inside that box that is detrimental to what I'm trying to accomplish. So I first tried a Yaesu FTDX10, thinking that a modern radio, compact, with a 21st century CAT interface, feature-rich, fast, would be the way to go. But the thing weighs a ton. It's this cast aluminum beast that's got an aluminum box wrapped around it, and it weighs more than twice what a K3 weighs. So I broke it down. So what do I want? I want price, performance, and packaging. And the K3 checks all those boxes. Great radio. With everything stripped out of it, weighs about 7 pounds. I don't need the second receiver. I don't need the general coverage filters. I just need a bare bones radio with a 100-watt amp. George's approach is he does his ribs with either CW or FT8. And the challenge there was you've got one screen that a remote operator has to use. And it's difficult to get everything onto one screen to operate multiple modes. Well, George is using laptops, and I've got these small form factor PCs that I use their company from B-Link. They're about 6 inches square, about 2 inches thick, very low power dissipation, low power, low heat, but certainly stout enough to do FT8. But they support 2 monitors. So you plug these little HDMI dummy plugs in the back, and with your remote desktop application, you can switch between 2 screens. We use one for CW, one for FT8. It's really easy. George is modified his ribs to either run 100 watts or kilowatt. Kilowatts can be that much power can be problematic, especially if you don't have somebody there watching it. He deploys outside. We're not going to deploy outside. Our stuff gets deployed inside of a building. You pop the front and rear cover off, you plug it in, you connect an Ethernet cable, connect an antenna, and you're on the air. Obviously, we're air cooled. Our approach and our use cases require that we have a PC internal to it. We're both using Node-RED running on Raspberry Pi as our user interface, as the foundation for monitoring, reporting, and where we're moving to is into a supervisor type function. We managed to squeeze the router in to that little box as well. So the DXpedition network is now enclosed in the rib. So you don't have to set up a router. You don't have to set up half the amount of Cat5 cabling you had. You plug in your Starlink terminal. You plug in, you're usually fanning out to another Ethernet switch, and you start hooking stuff up. So George's ribs are just under 5 cubic feet and weigh around 90 pounds. And we hit a pretty cool benchmark because we're a third the size and a third the weight. And one guy can carry it fairly easily. So I was talking about the user interface, and there's 2 user interfaces. We don't have the benefit of having a software application like Smart SDR. So this product that we use, Win4K3, that's developed by a ham up in VE2, it makes it easy for us. It's $60, and for $60, you can't do much software development. My partner on the development side, he says, well, I can do this. And I said, well, we got a bunch of other stuff to do, Jim. Let's just do this. And what it also does that's a real pain is it handles all the serial port communication and takes care of all of the collision issues and stuff that you have. So we don't have to worry about that. I talked about the little sticky note. Any of you could jump on here if you're familiar with N1MM, follow the instructions, and be working CW. To get on CW, all you have to do is you enter the frequency you want to be on and in N1MM, and it tunes the radio. You punch that little orange CW button, and it does several things, and I'm getting ahead of myself. When you enter the frequency, if it's a band change, we have a tuner on the antenna, and we have a tuner in the K3. They have to rock and roll together. You can't have them operating independently. So we use Node-RED. When you change bands, it disables the internal tuner in the K3, outputs a low-level RF signal, which initiates tuning on the remote tuner. When the remote tuner is done tuning, we turn on the internal tuner, invoke its function, and now the 2 tuners have worked together to come up with an optimal match, somewhat independently, but definitely in tandem. And all that is done with a very little bit of software in Node-RED. You hit the CW button after you put your frequency in. It normalizes your VFOs. It sets one VFO to be up 1 and puts you in split. So all you have to do to operate CW is enter the frequency and hit the CW button, and you're ready to go. It can't get any more simple than that. Jim's smiling. He's getting it. I like this. Okay, so that's the CW interface. And so if you're an FT8 guy, you just switch over to the other monitor in any desk. And this happens to be the SuperFox version of WSJT as one of the testers of that. We've got our dashboard over there that tells us what we're doing. And, I monitor temperature. You can tell what's going on by temperature, and I'll swear this up and down all day long, is you can tell more from monitoring temperature than you can from monitoring any one other parameter in a system like this. And it runs cool. It runs pretty cool. We're real pleased with that, although it didn't run so cool first time we got it on the air. So that's kind of where we've taken the rib. We're real happy with it. We've learned the CB0 trip was very much a learning experience for us. I was invited to go on the trip. I would rather have the rib go on this particular trip than go myself, because I thought I would learn more if I wasn't there. We got a whole lot of interest, and we had 35 operators operating remotely. These were all seasoned hams. A lot of, we had representation from the board of Northern California DX Foundation. We had seasoned DXers, but we also had the majority of our folks were guys that had never been on a DXpedition, would not have the opportunity, and didn't have the possibility of experiencing the thrill of working a pilot. So how do you schedule these guys? Well, we just set up a simple spreadsheet in Google Sheets, because and you grab time slots. It's like being in a contest. You go in that time slot. If your ass isn't in the chair, somebody else's better be. And that's the way we run the show. Slack is a multi-platform text collaboration platform. It works real well for this. One of my colleagues and somebody I've traveled with a lot, Glenn Johnson, was very active remotely on this trip. And he likened being in the Slack chat room as sitting around a table on a DXpedition and talking about the operation, talking about propagation. He likened it to being there, albeit virtually. I didn't expect this level of pleasure from the operators. I'm a technical guy. I'm worried about something not working correctly and how am I going to fix it. But as the operation wore on, I go, wow, this is really, really cool. These guys are having the ham radio time of their life. We started out setting up the rib at the team hotel when they got to the island. We got it on the air in less than an hour. We're making cues. The rest of the team is unpacking stuff, getting the logistics ready, figuring out what challenges they hadn't anticipated. The remote guys are filling the log. We made about 15,000 cues, which I think was about 18% of the total QSO count, which wasn't bad because we had a real marginal antenna. It wasn't matched on any band. We didn't have a tuner at the base of the antenna. So I have no idea how much RF was going out to the air, but I'm pretty sure a good chunk of it was coming back down the feed line to the radio because the SWR had to be terrible. With Node Red under the covers, we actually implemented a lot of enhancements based upon what we learned near real time. The operators didn't stop. We were under the covers, backdoored on a VPN, making changes while they were operating, and we didn't miss a beat. So the first time out, you're bound to have a problem. I have never seen the little clip on an ATC fuse holder fail. And you don't have visibility, and so we thought the internet went down. It came back up, the box recovered. We really didn't know what was happening until later on in the trip. But that was unfortunate, but we learned from it, and there was a lot of thought and process that went into how we're going to take a better look at things before we pull this thing out of my shop and send it on a trip. And again, this bottom bullet point I've touched on. I mean, I experienced a pleasure that I didn't anticipate, and that's pretty cool. I mean, it's fun to make these things work, but to see these guys, we did a post-mortem a couple days after the trip and had 30 guys on a Zoom call that were smiling ear to ear, wondering when the next time was going to be that they could do this. So here is a picture of Juan Fernandez. This is kind of looking east. You can see where the team hotel is located. If this was a satellite image, you would see that that point to the left blocks off a good chunk of North America. The rib was there for about 3 or 4 days. When the camp got established up on top of the island, unplugged the rib, took it up to the top of the island, plugged it in, bada bing, bada boom, we're back on the air. So this is just kind of a snapshot of the Google Sheets. This is how we keep track. We open the door at some point in time. We say, grab 3 slots. Ops grab 3 slots. A few days goes on. Schedule's not full. And we fill up the rest of the schedule. This is actually from FS and PJ7. We filled up the entire schedule for Robinson Crusoe. There was not an open slot available. And from that, we looked at it and said, well, how much time did each operator get? How many slots did we have? We filled the room, and we decided that 30 to 35 slots of 35 operators was kind of the sweet spot in terms of enough time to appreciate the experience and also to fill up the schedule. And we'll be using this as we go forward in same format. You know, this is a screenshot from Slack. The Slack channel was 24/7. I could wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and there were hams from Japan, Australia, the States, all talking about what was going on, who was going to get on next, what bands were hot, what our totals looked like. It was pretty cool. So FS and PJ7, I've been to St. Martin more times than I can remember. My YL really likes it there. And it's easy for us. We have a place we stay. We have friends there. And we know what to bring. And so it's just easy. And this is the second trip that Hal and his YL had made with us. We rented a house in an area it's called the Lowlands of St. Martin. It's if you're familiar with St. Martin, I'll show you a map. It's kind of to the west. We're on the north side, up on a cliff, wide open to Europe, North America, J8. Just a great operating location. We secured a location with the help of Marco, FS4 WBS, at a home of the chef in his restaurant. And this turned out to be just a little postage stamp of a garden, maybe 15 feet by 6 feet. We actually had to take the V8 antenna and make it a V4. We just telescoped it in so it was half size because we didn't have enough room for it. We had a team of 15 ops, which worked out well. The timing of this trip wasn't really great. We've been heads down getting ready for Rotuma and getting the rib ready, and didn't have time to do much training at all. Did a 5-minute Zoom call. And I told the guys, I said, you're going to have no support when I'm down there. And I don't plan on, putting any hands on the rib. So the problem with PJ7 is the Dutch kind of got behind on their power generating capacity, and they have rotating power outages 6 days a week and twice on Saturday. Well, we built the rib so that it recovers seamlessly from a power outage. So the power went down. I got a little alarm on my cell phone that a Raspberry Pi here in my lab at home was not able to communicate with the rib. I knew the power went back out. got another text message when the power came back on. We made about 5,800 cues. If I knew we were that close to 6,000, we would have, pressed on a bit more. Made 306 meter cues, most of which were with Europe. And we didn't encounter a single operational issue. Powered it up, hooked it up, ran it, disconnected it, took it over to the Dutch side, fired it up over there, didn't go back to the house until we were ready to pick it up. So that was a goal. You don't know if you're going to get there until you've gotten there. So that was a real nice moment for us. So again, thanks to Marco. Those of you on FT8 have probably worked Marco a number of times. I've known him for 20 some years. He had forgotten how long we knew each other until I reminded him. But without Marco's help, we couldn't have secured a location on the Dutch side. And he's just a great guy. Has a wonderful restaurant on the Dutch side of St. Martin. And if you're down there, reach out to me and I'll make sure that I make an introduction to Marco on your behalf. So here's what it looks like. We repackaged it after Juan Fernandez, and I needed a rack shelf, and there was nothing on the market that was exactly the same size, that had the space that I needed to utilize. So we built a rack shelf. It had to be light. And so what I found was it's a composite aluminum material, and it's used to make signs. It's the dielectric core is very much the composition of Delrin. It is strong, it's stiff, and it's light. And I wanted something that would conduct because I wanted to be able to bond to this plate. And so it has an aluminum coating on it, if you will. Had to sand down the finish that was on it, but it's lighter than steel, lighter than aluminum, easy to work with, and it fits this application perfectly. So shot on the left is where we sat it on St. Martin. Our stations were outside on a patio under an overhang, and it just sat there and percolated. Every once in a while, you'd hear the tuner run and the radio would beep, and you know somebody was changing bands. But other than that, it just ran perfectly. At Mateo's house, we just popped it on a chair next to his router, hooked up the Ethernet. And I'm not quite sure how I did this, but I got a great picture of the backside of Mateo's dog and Hal in the picture. I didn't notice that until I pulled the photograph up to put it in the presentation. But, good stuff. It really works well. I'm very pleased with how well things are going on this front. This is the antenna we use. The base is secured by a 2x2 piece of aluminum angle that's driven into the ground. Those 4-foot long pieces of, they call them fiberglass military tubes, that's tie wrapped to the base. And so it takes a minute to drive the stake in, takes a minute to put the base in place. The tuner is attached to a short section of that fiberglass tube. It slips on top. The counterpoise is attached to the top of the tuner, and magically, the diameter of the base section of the vertical is the same diameter as the inside of that tube, and it just drops right in. It takes us about 5 minutes to put up one of these antennas. This is what we're going to use for the ribs when we go to Rotuma, because the operation, we're going to get there, we're going to get the ribs set up, get the Starlink set up, and our remote operators will be making cues while we're busy getting the rest of the infrastructure established. So everybody likes a picture. The French side is to the north, Dutch side is to the south, obviously. You can see what a great location we have on the French side. We're 60 feet above the water, right on the cliff. And it's just tremendous. You know, at 6 meters, we didn't have to get our antenna up very high. We put our verticals up as close to the edge as we can. And we just do our thing. Ladies go to the beach during the day. Sometimes we do, sometimes we operate. It's pretty casual. And that's just kind of the way it's morphed into. I don't know how many cues I've made from St. Martin, but it's got to be approaching 30,000 at this point over the years. So now for the second half of the presentation. So what's next? Or the last few months have been very exciting, really busy. Planning for a DXpedition comes with a fair amount of stress, and we're in the throes of it. There's a hurdle we got to get cleared here pretty quick. We got to get ready to get our stuff shipped, and I'm looking forward to the day when everything's boxed up and we're ready to take it to the freight forwarder. So we're going to Rotuma. We're going to be there for 17 days. So why Rotuma? It's not really all that rare. We had planned to go to Tokelau, which is around number 40 on the most wanted list. We had the forms in hand. We were working with the government, securing passage. And we get an email one day saying, we're shut down to tourism. And so it's like, okay, got to come up with plan B pretty quick. Where can we get to affordably? And someplace that will support what we wanted to do. When we were looking at Tokelau early on, the youth element or component of this had not gelled yet. It wasn't even on our horizons. That came together at Dayton. We met with the Yoda folks in Dayton, and Tuesday after Dayton, we'd formalized our partnership and we had a press release. It just was boom, 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 that quick. And it's really very exciting. So, partnership with Youth on the Air. We ended up with 3 ops as we talked about earlier. They're all under 23. And the age of adulthood on Fiji is 21. And I didn't want to be in a position from the Fijian government's perspective of having a minor. Just big red lights, liability was just flashing in my mind. And so I said, Hal, we've got to find, the ops got to be over 21. Maybe we can work through it, but there's the potential for a really unpleasant surprise there if something was to go sideways. So Jamie's actually has some DXpedition experience. He is 23. He is in law enforcement in the UK. He's been to 3B8M a couple of times. He was part of the 8X7 operation in Guinea earlier this year, or Guyana, I'm sorry. And he jumped on the opportunity. Connor was teed up to us by Craig, K9CT. Connor went to Craig's alma mater, or is, I think he recently graduated, and is also part of Craig's contest crew. We originally only had 2 young ops. Mike, W6IZT, who some of you might know, was on the team, still on the team, but is not going to be able to participate with us on the island, unfortunately. Some timing and some things that he's got going on just didn't work out for us. And then the old farts for myself, Hal, and a colleague of mine from down here in the Atlanta area, Nathan, K4NHW. Great young guy, new into the DXpeditioning arena. He is a paramedic, and that is a skill set that is very valuable when you go on these trips, especially when you're going to an island that has once-a-day plane service, a clinic, and not much in the way of medical attention. There's only 1,000 people plus or minus on Rotuma. 15 years ago, there were closer to 2,000. It's a lot like many of the Pacific islands that I'm familiar with. I could speak personally about Pitcairn because I've been there a few times, but they don't have anything to retain their youth. the kids are up and leaving to go to college. For the most part, they don't come back, unfortunately. So that's a little bit of background on Rotuma. So the plan, 6 ops on island, 3 local stations, and maybe 4. I spoke with Eric Schwartz at Elecraft, and we're probably going to take a K4 with us and showcase the K4's remote capabilities to the K4 community. 160 meter and 80 and 60 meter inverted Ls. These antennas are being donated to us by Dave, WD5COV. And they were the low band antennas that were used on the recent Clipperton trip. And I want to put a big shout out to the Clipperton team. They received an award from the Northern California DX Foundation, which allowed them to contribute to funding our trip in a significant manner. So the Gene Spinelli, K5GS, and that crew have been very generous. Just, you know, quarter wave verticals on 30 and 40, vertical dipole arrays for the upper bands. And like the V8 antenna, we've got a way to rapidly deploy these, rapidly repair them, rapidly configure, because we're all about saving time, because you're either wasting time or you're making cues. You're not doing both. We're going to do a 6 meter operation, hoping to do some moon bounce. Moon bounce is a challenge for expeditions, especially small team expeditions. We've got a couple of requests, and I kind of turned it around and pushed back on the 6 meter community and said, come up with a way for us to do this easy, and we'll take a look at it. We did 6 meters on Pitcairn, big 7-element, 30-foot boom Yagi, 30-foot tower. It took up 2 of our ops full time. They were running EME at night, and they weren't operating HF during the day. So we had to kind of turn that challenge around. A couple of guys in the 6 meter community said, okay, we'll run with that. So we're waiting on a proposal. But if we do EME, it's going to be staffed by remote operators.
Greg, I got a thought here for you on that.
Go, Jim.
Roughly a couple of years ago, I got very close and personal with AG6EE, who's a guy who grew up in Czech, has been in the States for maybe a decade or more, now a citizen. I discussed with him, I gave him a rundown of all the wild and wonderful things that you and George were doing with RIB. And he's involved in activating 6 meter grids where you got to drag a lot of stuff up mountains. He took what George was doing, completely repackaged his stuff, and built portable 6 meter antennas that clamp together magnetically. They're lightweight, so you can drag them, and they literally click together in no time. And he's heavy duty into EME on both 6 and 2. So
and that's AG6EE.
Right.
That's a familiar call to me. I want to learn more about what he's doing, because
I'm
I'm all about replicating the wheel instead of inventing it.
I'll hook you up with him at some point.
I appreciate that, Jim. So we're going to have the V8 antennas for the ribs, and the remote tuner, non-resident antenna. It's really a better fit for a rib than trying to do antenna switching and all that. It makes it a lot simpler. We're going to do our best on 160 and 80. We know we're going to have to put up some sort of receive antenna. I've had good luck with pennants on this trip. They go up quick. And, you know, they fit the footprint that we're trying to squeeze things into. We will be doing club log real-time uploads, live stream, and leaderboard. I think that is par for the course these days. We're going to do some podcasts. We'll probably do something with K3LR and DX Engineering. We'll do something with Eric at Elecraft. We'll give our young operators an opportunity to do what they want to with social media, because they view social media differently than us old guys do. And so they're going to have they're going to have their own palette to paint a picture on. So this is our location. It's a Google Earth image. You can see the shoreline. North is normalized. North is to the top. We've got plenty of space here in this compound that's to the northwest side of the road. We've got a lot of beach to our disposal, and I've got about 3,200 feet of coax. So we're going to spread things out as much as we can. We may have to switch out vertical dipole arrays if we don't have enough real estate to put them all up, but we've built that into our deployment plan to make that happen just in a matter of minutes. This is a B&B called, Lillian's Homestead. It's Lillian and her husband, Vama. Vama is a retired electrician, and that takes a load of just thought and planning off my plate. I just told Vama how much current we were going to draw, how many outlets we were needing. He's going to build us a shelter. They can only accommodate 6, which is dictating the team size. Vama's daughter and son-in-law live on the mainland, what they call the mainland, which is the island of Fiji. They're participating actively in our local logistics, which is a great peace of mind. And it's all coming together quite nicely. We have an over-the-water shot to Europe, Japan, and to all of North America, with the exception of Florida and southern Texas. So we like the location. So now on to the bigger picture here. And this is our mission statement off our website. And we're really taking this seriously. This is transformed from a couple of guys wanting to go on into an expedition into being on a mission to see what we can do to pull more young operators into DXpeditioning. We want this to be a crop of youth that are leading us moving forward into the next generation. So you got a problem to solve. You can't solve the problem if you don't understand what the problem is. So we are an aging group. And I've been doing this now for about 20 years on a big scale. And most of the guys I started out with were older than me, and a good number of them have passed. My mentor, Bob K4UEE, recently left us in February. Ironically, the same day, different year that my mom passed away. So I don't think that failing is too strong of a statement, but we're not backfilling fast enough. So you think about this process. We bring some kids in, and they've got to learn. If we don't do this now, if we don't pull this off and get this started for 5 years, there's going to be a whole group of DXpeditioners that are no longer in the game. We need to create excitement and interest. We know how to do that. We know what the barriers to entry are. We'll talk about that. Bob talked about the bullpen. That's one leg of our recruitment stool, if you will. And there's a lot of how-to expertise and knowledge that we're going to lose if we don't grab onto it. And like anything, if you don't use it, you lose it. And we could share this with these kids, but if they don't use the knowledge and expertise that we can impart upon them, it's going to go away. The easy part of an expedition is sitting down in the chair and starting to make cues. The negotiations. Are you dealing with fish and wildlife? Are you dealing with the French counterpart TAF? There's always negotiations, whether it's as simple as securing a place to operate or as complex as dealing with an organization like Fish and Wildlife. Application preparation. You know, these Fish and Wildlife applications are comprehensive documents. I was involved in K5D and K1N, Desiceo and Navassa, respectively. The application was a thick binder, covered everything. Fundraising, sponsorships, that's the easy part. I capitalized logistics and transportation because those will give you gray hair. It's very difficult to ship by air these days. You cannot ship by air on a passenger plane unless you're what the TSA calls a known shipper. It makes it real difficult to get stuff to a place like Fiji that's serviced by predominantly passenger planes. We don't have time to ship by boat. It's going to go by air from the States to Fiji and then by boat to Rotuma. I'm spending a huge amount of time working on those 2 bullet points that are capitalized. Another one is safety. On our trips, we require that the participants obtain medevac insurance that meets our requirements as the leadership of the team. We had to have somebody medevaced out off of Pitcairn. He took a tumble getting onto the Braveheart, broke his collarbone, broke 5 ribs. He was in bad shape. And we were able to get him off of Pitcairn, got him to Mangariva. He got on a flight to Papeete where he was hospitalized. One of the caveats of these evac insurance policies is you have to be discharged from a hospital. They're not worth the paper they're written on if we can't get you to a hospital, get you admitted, get you treated, and then get you back to the States. So it's something that we take really seriously. I don't want to have to stay behind with somebody that got hurt. I don't want to get hurt. So that's first and foremost in our planning process. And then the operational planning, that's pretty easy. But collectively, this is a pretty broad yet very specified list of knowledge and expertise. And again, the guys like Glenn Johnson, Ralph Fedor, Paul Ewing, Gene Spinelli, these are the guys that have this knowledge. And we've got to get that knowledge transferred to these folks that we're empowering to be the next generation of DXpeditioners. So how do we create the excitement? Well, YOTA is a large organization. And it's multinational. There's YOTA North America that is youth on the air. There's organizations in individual countries in Europe called YOTA that's youngsters on the air. This is where we're going to draw from. How do we get them excited? We get them hooked on running a pilot. How do we do that in mass? We do it remotely. So we're going to have 2 ribs. We know the math. We're going to need 60 to 65 operators. So we're going to have 30-some youth operators and a similar number of what we're going to call experienced ribbers. These are the guys that have done the rib thing before, experienced DXpeditioners. So we're bringing everybody together, albeit in a virtual manner, where they can learn. All of the remote operators are going to be coordinated by our YOTA partners. Keys, or Case is how his name is pronounced, W6IZT, is on our team. He cannot make the trip. I'm sure he's going to make the next one. But he's going to run the remote operator coordination. He was our coordinator for St. Martin, so he's got a taste of it. And, you know, he's a really, really bright kid. I don't have to tell him much. I just have to tell him what the job entails. He's running off and coming up with the details on how he wants to do it. That's the way I want it to be done. And it's working out great. So where do we recruit? We know how to generate interest. The pool ops are going to come from YOTA. the contesting community has done a great job bringing young operators into the fold. And Contest University is a great forum to do that. You know, Tim has been spearheading that for a number of years now. And, you know, hats off to Tim. He does so much for the hobby. In my search for locating young operators, I came across a list. It was a little bit dated. It had 980 some operators on there that were all under the age of 25 across the world. I had no idea this list existed. I don't think anybody, it was a young guy said, hey, you know, there's this list out here. We've got this chat room we hang out in, and there's hundreds of us. And I'm going, wow, great. Clubs like yours, you know, in the process of fundraising, we reached out to about 100 clubs, including yours. And we sent out a request for funding support. We also sent out a request if you knew of any young operators who could join the trip. And we got a few responses, and I know most of the clubs don't. But one of my friends in Japan reached back to me. He said, Greg, we're the largest DXing club in Japan. We've got 2 members under 60. And it's like a gut punch. It's like, wow, this is the challenge of the future. You know, I can remember back when there were lots of small team Japanese DXpeditions. You could run JA pileups from the Caribbean for hours, but things are changing on the amateur front in Japan in advance of what I think we're going to see across the rest of our community. And so that was really, not in a good way, enlightening for me. So what are the barriers to entry? What do young people don't have? Time and money. We can't fix the time away problem, but we can fix the financial part of it. NorCal, bless their hearts, they are 110% behind us. I reached out to them and said, we got a barrier to entry problem here. What do you need, Greg? Well, I got 2 young operators. Can you pay for their plane tickets? No problem. Boom, just like that. Don Greenbaum had been in Europe, and we had a 3rd young op on board. And I said, hey, Don, he says, I'm on my way home. I'll call you when I get back. I said, I'm not hitting you up for more money as much as I am giving you the first right of refusal. I need you to buy another plane ticket if you can. Done. It was just, it's a beautiful thing when things fall together so quickly and you've got this major hurdle that you want to get around, and people just step up, you know, and make it really easy. So this is going to be something that's going to be important moving forward. NorCal set the bar. If we're successful and we continue to take this process forward, we'll be calling on the community at large to help out with that. And I think that everybody on this call probably realizes the benefit of doing that. So what's next? You know, Rotuma is a trip. It started out as a trip, and now it's turned into sort of a springboard, an opportunity to take the first step to do something more significant. And could we do this twice in 2025? I don't see why not. We're going to need some other mentors to step up, but we're going to be challenging teams that are looking at going on DXpeditions to staff their on-island teams with a similar mix of youth. Can we double down again in 2026 and make it happen 4 times? That's a bit more of a stretch, but I think we have to try. Because if we don't do this, I'm going to go back to, if we don't grab the knowledge, leverage the expertise, we're going to lose it. And I want these young guys to contribute. What could we be doing differently? What things in terms of social networking, interaction, do you foresee that can help, for lack of a better term, enhance our value proposition, which is a result of bringing a more fulfilling user experience to our users, you guys and the guys that are coming up into this area of the hobby. I didn't even look at the clock and see how much time I'm taking here. I guess I'm doing okay. So, how can you help? You've already started. Thank you very much for voting to support us. Our fundraising continues. We're, in terms of DXpedition planning time cycles, we're doing this in a pretty short period of time. We're looking at shipping maybe as soon as the next 30 to 35 days. Real short fuse. We're welcome individual contributions. You can visit our website at rotuma2024.com. We partner with an organization that Craig Thompson, K9CT, is behind. They're a 501c3. Donate through Craig's organization. Talk to your tax professional. It may be tax deductible. You can pay by PayPal or pay by check. And that's Craig's address in Elmwood, which is right outside of Peoria. So with that, it's a wrap. I want to thank you for the opportunity. This is the first time that I have told this story in this manner. A week from today, I'm delivering the same presentation to the Twin Cities DX Association up in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The following Saturday, I'm doing a presentation for the CDXC, which is the UK DX club. I would have liked to go over there. I can't squeeze it in. I've got more pressing things to do, but it's a real fun gathering. So with that, again, thank you very much. And I want to open the floor for questions.
I'd like to make a couple of observations, Greg.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, okay. Thank you. First of all, the great engineering that has been done both by you guys and by folks whose work you've taken advantage of is all my definition of a great engineering. It's applied science to a specific problem. And a lot of that comes from guys who have the hands-on experience of DXpeditions, of operating, of dragging stuff around and setting it up quickly. Wayne Burdick, who designed the K3, is a QRP drag it around guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the K3 is lightweight.
Yes.
Tom Schiller, of course, has been doing antennas for expeditions for decades, and he knows a hell of a lot about it, and I love his designs. And the stuff that you've been doing. And AG6EE is like that. And his ideas have built on what you guys have been doing. So that's what I have to say. I think you're absolutely right to have keyed in on the pass it down of knowledge. That's awfully important. And I'm going to support some of this stuff, probably with Northern California DX Federation.
Thank you. I appreciate your feedback, Jim. It means an awful lot to me. And I have a great deal of respect for you, your knowledge, and your expertise.
Other questions for Gregg?
Hey, Greg, this is Eric, WA1S6K in North Carolina.
Hi, Eric.
Hey, Greg, great presentation tonight. Tonight, really appreciate it. What I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned about having two tuners, one at the antenna, and you're using the other tuner in the K3. Being a hardware engineer myself here, I was kind of interested in why you have to use both tuners, and I'm wondering if you're using the Raspberry Pi to maybe tune the one first out at the antenna, and then the K3 is kicked off after that. And I'm just wondering why the tuner you have is not able to tune. I guess you said it was 45 feet vertical. You know, and does that operate all bands? And what kind of an SWR do you get on all bands there if you happen
So
to?
it's a non-resonant antenna. And the reason we have the tuner at the base is to match the antenna to the feed line impedance. If we just use the tuner inside the radio, we would have, and the tuner in the K3 is amazing. And it's the same, basically the same tuner that's in the Cat 500, the KPA 1500. They leverage the same L network tuner, and they work great. In fact, I'm impressed. I'm really impressed by what they've done with the tuners. So we need the tuner at the antenna base to match the base, to match the antenna to the feed line impedance. We use the tuner in the K3 more to just do fine tuning. The tuner at the antenna, I don't know if it's a 7x7 L network or an 8x8. It's not always going to find a perfect match. In fact, it'll stop tuning. Maybe if it hits a 1.8 or 2.0, sometimes it'll match 1-to-1. But by marrying the functionality of the tuners together in a sequential fashion, we can always present the radio with a great match. And you're spot on the way it works. When you change bands, and I'm hoping that some of you will participate with us because there are opportunities for more folks to get involved as remote operators. You change bands and you're looking at that little dashboard. That is, it's actually the Node-RED dashboard. Node-RED's the software that runs on the Pi. As soon as you change frequencies, you'll see the tuner turn off. Second later, the K3 goes into low power output. Outputs 10 watts. That 10 watts triggers the antenna tuner at the base of the antenna to seek a match. We give it 5 to 6 seconds to do its tuning routine, at which point in time we put the K3 back into receive, we enable the internal tuner, and we initiate its tuning function. So the worst match we see is 1.2, 1.3 to 1. Could we get away without the internal tuner on the K3? Sure, we probably could. But it's there. We know how to use it. We figured out how to make them dance together. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, you sure did. That's fantastic. That's the way you'd have to do that, is otherwise they'll start hitting and banging each other. Fantastic. Thank you very much. One last thing, if you can, Greg. The group that's going to Jarvis, is that your group or is there a different group that's handling that? Because from what I understand, they're going to test the Super Fox on American Samoa here any moment. And I'm wondering, they're using obviously a radio in a box also?
Yes. So I'm very much still part of that group. I've spent a lot of time with George. He's been out in the Pacific. I was with him in June or July last year when we went to Ducey. I had to come back home. I've got other responsibilities as well. George and I still collaborate. I brought the V8 antenna to the mix, and it ended up sticking in the arsenal. See, I'm very much involved. I'm part of the Super Fox testing group. You know, Northern California is very much involved in what I'm doing along with what George is doing. So yeah, there's synergies. Are we directly connected? I would say not necessarily, but there's an awful lot of collaboration. There's nothing that I'm doing that isn't available to George, and I'm very much in tune with what he's doing. And, you know, if there's something that he's working on that I can benefit from, then that works out being a two-way street.
Do you find any problems with just 100 watts on these islands? Where I guess is the 1 kW that George is going to use? Is that for, you know, certain modes, or is there a reason why? I mean, obviously size and weight and power and all that would be a reason not to have the amplifier built in.
Well, we couldn't fit an amplifier into our form factor. We've actually figured out a way to squeeze 300 watt radios into that box using and they're just FT8. We're using just for FT8. We're using 3 Hermes Light 2s and 3 of the Hard Rock 100 watt amplifiers, and we can actually fit 3 FT8 radios into that box. The nice thing about FT8 is it's synchronous. You run all the transmitters simultaneously. You don't have to worry about interstation interference.
Okay, right.
So yeah, but trying to run a kilowatt station remotely is challenging. Things can go wrong sideways in a big way in a hurry. If I was going to run power, I would probably limit it to 500 watts and couple a KPA 500 to the K3 because the integration is so tight. The amplifier essentially becomes in the same control complex as the radio. You're not bringing much complexity to the table with the KPA 500 when using it with the K3. We put our antennas on the beach on the water. We don't have much trouble working the world in that environment. You know, Jim had mentioned Tom. There was years ago, there was an operation in Jamaica called Team Vertical, which I think was a bunch of California guys, but it was the first expedition that I can recall where they used these vertical dipole antennas on the shoreline. If the water's calm enough, we'll put the antennas in the water. But you know, that can be problematic if we have weather. We'll make that call when we get there, but our antennas will be as close to the shore as possible.
Yeah, that whole thing is a big part of George's genius. He gets the dB out of the antenna rather than from the power amp.
Yeah.
I want to mention one other thing that you talked about that I thought was very important, that you found that monitoring temperature was very useful. And yes, I agree. Exactly the same thing when you're trying to optimize CW keying waveform, because the function of that is to narrow your signal up as much as possible. So while as a designer, what you're doing is tweaking that waveform, and that's what Wayne did, you look at the result by looking at the bandwidth. I never look at keying waveform. I just send a series of DITs and then look at how much space I'm taking up.
Right. Yeah, it was a learning experience for me. And when somebody's on there and he's monitoring, you know, voltage into the K3 instead of monitoring temperature, because that's all part of that same drop-down menu item that's on the UI, you know, I just kind of cringe because I always keep an eye on that, because you don't know when somebody's going to throw a blanket or a towel over the top of it. But you know, more times than not, if it's getting warm, it's because there's an underlying problem that you're not otherwise going to see. Any other questions? Let me throw one out for the audience. Be perfectly honest and candid with me. Give me some of your thoughts on remote operation, because it's been a hot topic. And with FT8, that can be viewed as an enabling technology for remote DXpeditioning. But I want to know how people feel about it. And then I'll share with you just one sort of tagline that I apply to technology, and then we can wrap this thing up.
From Ed, WA9GQK, I think one of the original reasons for developing it, the fact that areas are becoming inaccessible, is reason enough to say, keep it. It's legit. It's the only way we're going to get some of these expeditions on the air anymore. So I have no problem whatsoever with remoting.
Okay. That's good feedback. I appreciate that because it comes across in terms of support.
My only objection to remoting is for guys who hire a station that's 3,000 miles closer to DX so that they can make the QSO. I view that as cheating. When I moved from Chicago to California, I started over on all the awards that were seriously distance-based.
That's commendable. So there were a lot of discussions last year about robot FT8 operation and should it apply for DXCC credit if an expedition employs it. And the ARRL took a position on it. And I'm the technologist, and I'm looking at all this. I go, well, okay, so how can you take a position on something? How are you going to enforce that position? And I'm going to leave you with a thought. Technology is like a freight train. It has mass and velocity. Good luck stopping it. And with that, and those 2 cents worth, I'm going to say thank you again. 73s to all of you. I encourage you to take some time to work the guys, George's team on American Samoa. He's testing there. Your contacts come to George in the way of feedback. Give him an honest signal report. He will appreciate that. And because that's going to go to a long way to influencing what they're going to do when they get to Jarvis in about a month. And, you know, please take the time. You may not need Jarvis and Palmyra for a new one, but they've put a ton of effort into this. I mean, if you go back, this started 5.5 years ago on Baker Island. So that's that.
Awesome
You guys have a great
presentation,
club.
Greg.
Thank you very much.